Today's philosophy is brought to you by the 17th century French Enlightenment philosopher René Descartes. He said, "Cogito ergo sum," I think, therefore I am. So I think we all know who Mary, Queen of Scots was. She was at 6 days old, she became the first queen, the first female to rule Scotland in her own right. And she was the daughter of James V and the mother of James VI and of Scotland, who was also James I of England when he became King of England in the early 1700s. And Mary, Queen of Scots, had a fair claim to the English throne. So Elizabeth I of England kept her locked up and exiled for about 19 years, reluctant to execute her, and eventually she had no choice in order to hold on to the throne. So Queen Elizabeth I of England, after an attempted assassination plan on her by Mary, Queen of Scots and her cohorts, decided enough is enough. So she had Mary, Queen of Scots beheaded at a place called Fotheringhay Castle. Now, we've come to Fotheringhay Castle. I've never been here before, and I'm walking up to the steps because there's no longer a castle here. It's just an old motte, an elevated level of ground where the old keep used to stand. And as I walk up, I'm just about to turn around and see it. Here we are, Mother, up on the motte where the keep used to stand, standing on the very same spot that Mary, Queen of Scots, was beheaded in 16... sometimes I forget things. But interestingly, this also combines a little bit more history, because it was also inside this keep, on the very spot that we're standing, where King Richard III was born. You remember King Richard III? He was the one who was spoken about by Shakespeare at length. He's the king who executed his own princes, his own nephews in the Tower of London, and he's also the one who spent 500 years underground until he got dug up over at Leicester's Social Services car park, which we'll be going to today.
Why wouldn't you have something built onto that?
So we've come down to the bottom of the motte to find a stone that has been set up in memory of Fotheringhay Castle, and all this relative information that we spoke about whilst we were up there. And if I remember correctly, Mary, Queen of Scots, never met Queen Elizabeth.
No, she didn't. They were cousins, though, weren't they?
Yeah. The Fotheringhay Castle, where we just came from, was the home of the Yorkists, and that's why Mary, Queen of Scots, was locked up there and ultimately beheaded. And we've come down to this town called Oundle, and the stones from Fotheringhay Castle first and spread all over the county so it could never be rebuilt again. Most of the stones were brought down here to a hotel called the Talbot, and the stairs leading into the hotel are the same stairs that Mary, Queen of Scots, was made to walk down when she was beheaded on the 8th of February 14, I forget. Anyway, when she died, there was an executioner called Bull. I know that because I bumped into a bloke with the surname Bull, and he told me about this. He executed, and he got drunk the night before, and it took him about 4 swings to ultimately behead her. And hidden under her petticoat, they discovered that she'd smuggled her dog down there. Remember the nursery rhyme? Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? With silver bells and cockle shells and all your maids in a row. Well, the cockle shells, it's a bit ambiguous as to where that comes from, but the silver bells were symbolic of the Catholic Church, and the maids in a row were the 4 maids that I just spoke about, all called Mary, because Mary was the name for maids. And I still can't remember their names. I'm sure it was Mary Cretin, Mary Breton, Mary Livingston and Mary Fleming. During the English Civil War that ran from 1642 to 1651, it was a series of it was a series of political machinations that there were conflicts between the parliamentarians and the royalists, and the parliamentarians obviously ultimately won because it was under Oliver Cromwell that they ended up executing King Charles I at Whitehall Palace, and that led to the Commonwealth. Well, so there was this 10-year period where there was no royal family, and Oliver Cromwell became Lord Commander of the Commonwealth for most of that time, except for the last year when his son took over, Richard. But if you want to learn anything interesting about Oliver Cromwell, look up his head, because for a couple of centuries afterwards his head was carried around and used at dinner parties for entertainment, because he was ultimately dug up and re-executed because they felt that the punishment of dying wasn't enough. They dug him up and hung him. The stairs that Mary Queen of Scots was led down to her execution are timber stairs, and they were relocated when they were pulled down from Fotheringhay Castle, and they were brought down to the Talbot Hotel in Oundle. And these are the stairs. I'll show you the stairs in a moment, but I just want to point out that I'm also going to put up some pictures where you'll see a tiny little crown indentation on a piece of wood, which was stamped on there to show that right next to that, when Mary Queen of Scots got to the top of the stairs as she was being led down to her execution, the wood was very soft and wet, incredibly wet and soft, and she held onto it so tightly that her ring had made an indentation into the wood. I'm always skeptical when I read these things, but many people in the town have told us about this. So here's a picture of the tiny little dent. So I'm at the top of the staircase. This actual staircase, is the timber staircase, is the one that stood in Fotheringhay Castle, and it was down this flight of stairs, these stairs, although they were in a different layout at the time, that Mary Queen of Scots was led down to her execution. And apparently this timber was incredibly wet, and when Mary held onto it, she held on with dear life, and the ring on this hand has placed a dent on the timber. That's it right there. Right next to it is a crown that was stamped on there to remember the spot. Apparently it was very wet, very soft, and her ring made that dent. So they managed to save these stairs for people like myself, or for yourself, to come and have a look at them. These glass windows were also taken from Fotheringhay Castle, and legend has it that they're the ones that Mary was looking out through as they were preparing the scaffold for her execution. And this gate here, when it was originally at Fotheringhay Castle, was the boundary that marked her place of confinement. So as you know, we were at Fotheringhay Castle this morning, and when King James, he completely dismantled the castle and sent the stonework all over the countryside. And here in Oundle at the Talbot Hotel is the staircase that originally stood in Fotheringhay Castle. And legend has it that this was all very, very wet on the day of Mary's execution. And up here, you'll see a stamp of a crown, because it marks the spot right there where Mary had pressed with her thumb, with her finger, and the ring has caused damage to the timber. Now, if you come down here, these windows were part of the original castle as well. And apparently these are the windows that Mary Queen of Scots looked out upon the scaffold which was being erected for her beheading. The staircase tells us another story if we come this way. This gate here, let me start there for right, Mark. This gate here marked the boundary of where Mary Queen of Scots' confinement ended. So this actual oak timber gate would have been where she would have been able to hold on to and communicate with other people who were free. As a former rugby player and fan, I've done a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. This is Rugby School. The William Webb Ellis statue is just around the corner, but directly behind me here, you can see the uprights, is the very ground. Legend has it that in 1823, a kid named William Webb Ellis picked up a soccer ball and ran with it, forcing his friends to catch him and tackle him. just got to go down and get my photo taken with statue. Well, that's just got my photo with him. That's the birth of rugby union, but a lot of people ask you, what's the difference between league and union? Well, considerable amount of differences, but rugby league was born in 1895 in the George Hotel in Huddersfield, when a group of players and officials got together and decided that it was unfair of blokes who would play rugby for a company during the Industrial Revolution, and if they got injured, they were unable to feed their families. So you go and work for a foundry, for example, they'd ask you to play for their team. And eventually too many blokes got injured, and they were pointing out that we can't feed our kids. If I break my arm playing for your rugby club and I can't work for 6 weeks, I have no income. So they decided to create a league, and that's the birth of rugby league. George Hotel, Huddersfield, 1895.